Ladies and gentlemen, record geeks, retired plate spinners, and millennials who want to impress their parents with their record collections. Welcome to the Rhino Podcast, brought to you by Rhino Records. Get ready for new releases, deep tracks, and conversations with your favorite artists and bands, and balloons for the kiddies. And now, your hosts with the most, Rich Mahan and Dennis the Menace.
On this episode of the Rhino Podcast, we speak with Michael Howe, archivist for the Prince Estate, about the new Prince release, Originals.
Get on my own way. That's a new golden rule. Joy because it's human. Much too hard to be cool. 100 miles an hour, baby. That's what it's all about. I need a lover that slow me down. Somebody that'll make me shout. There's no misconception. That's everything on the one.
Hey, Rich.
Hey, Dennis.
You know, we say this every time, but I'm going to say it again. Have you been to the Rhino website lately?
I go every day, and that's no joke. I am on the email list. You can sign up for news and cool things that are happening, but you can also sign up for Album of the Day. Besides Album of the Day, there are Rhino curated playlists that link through to Spotify of all different genres, and there are exclusive items like the massive Woodstock box set Back to the Garden that are available only at rhino.com. There's all kinds of cool stuff there. If you are a music fan, you owe it to yourself to get connected.
And I have to add one thing. You also have the opportunity there to subscribe to this podcast. And I mean, we're invested in that just a little bit.
Speaking of podcasts and topics, this week we have the pleasure of speaking with Michael Howe, who is the archivist for the Prince Estate. He's in charge of the mythical Prince vault, all of the music, all the recorded material, whether it was his studio recordings, rehearsal recordings, live video, live audio from performances, it's all in there. Michael talks with us today, gives us a special look inside the vault, and tells about pulling out some music for a new release, Prince Originals.
Yeah, and you know what? I'm just going to do a little scanning here and read you a few song titles. Sex Shooter, Jungle Love, Manic Monday, Baby You're a Trip, The Glamorous Life.
And so people might say, Dennis, those aren't Prince songs. That's Sheila E. That's The Time. So what people need to know is that Originals is Prince's original version of all of these songs that he wrote for other artists.
And it is a revelation. It really is. To hear where those songs started in their, in some case, rawest form.
Prince fans are going to absolutely love this. Originals is available in a few different configurations. It's available digitally. It's available as a single CD, a 2LP set, and a deluxe 2LP CD set.
Well, you were there, and I can't wait to listen. So why don't we get into your conversation with Michael Howe about Prince Originals here on the Rhino Podcast.
Michael Howe, thank you. Welcome to the Rhino Podcast.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
So you work for the Prince Estate. Why don't you tell us what your title is and what you do on a day-to-day?
I am the chief archivist for the Prince Estate, which means I am responsible generally for the curation, preservation, organization, and overall well-being of the entire audiovisual output of Prince's career.
Wow.
Yeah.
How long
you have summarized my thoughts.
How long have you been at this?
Well, I worked as Prince's sort of last A&R guy, although there was no bona fide A&Ring to do when he was alive.
Right.
When he sort of re-engaged with Warner Brothers at the during the 2014 kind of time period. So technically, I've been in the Prince ecosystem for 5 years, but what I'm currently doing, I've been doing for about just under 2, I would say. Yeah, since middle to late 2017.
The Prince Vault, which contains, it's mythical.
Yeah.
The way people refer to it and talk about it. It contains all of the recorded material that he produced, whether it was studio recordings, live recordings, rehearsal tapes, videos.
Mm-hmm.
For the most part, it's been moved from Paisley Park in Minnesota to Los Angeles.
Yeah.
But before it moved, what was it like to walk inside that vault?
Well, that's a very good question, and not an experience I had, believe it or not. However, from the people that I've spoken with who were part of that world, it was a bona fide vault, kind of a bank vault, swinging door, highly secure proposition.
Climate controlled.
For which climate controlled, all the bells and whistles, basically, as you would imagine, a repository of that caliber to be. But it was not perhaps in the most conventional state of organization, shall we say, at that point.
Right. So since then, have you cataloged all the contents?
It's a multi-part answer. We have begun weaving our way through an enormous amount of material. All of it is accounted for, meaning it all has barcodes and numbers and is in one location, and we can, easily identify specific assets when we need to. But not all of them have been digitized or, otherwise organized in a way that would be obvious to somebody just walking in there kind of off the street and looking at it as if it were a shelf of books, for example.
Right. How much physical material is there? I mean, like, how large of a room do you have to house everything in the vault?
It's a very large room. It's a tremendous amount of audiovisual material on basically any format you could possibly imagine, with the exception of, wax cylinder, perhaps. I mean, it's, analog of every stripe. It's, digital formats. It's film. It's, largely outdated video, sort of formats at this point. I mean, it's just a tremendous array of, a head-spinning array of stuff. I mean, it's a real challenge sometimes to determine how to best contextualize some of the stuff. And although it's a wonderful challenge to have, because the body of work is so, magnificent, and, it's a very humbling experience to be, kind of in it every day.
Yeah. How often does your jaw drop when you listen to something new?
A lot. Yeah. It's a weekly occurrence, I would say.
Percentage-wise, with the contents of the vault, how much of it would you say are unreleased songs versus things that were commercially released? Not counting like rehearsal tapes, live recordings.
This starts to get into areas that are difficult for me to specifically respond to, only because of the limitations of my NDA. But suffice it to say that there is an extraordinary amount of finished unreleased material that
completed masters, not just
completed
ideas.
Masters. Correct.
Wow.
Yes, completed masters, not instrumental snippets that were abandoned or not revisited or otherwise sort of cast aside. I'm talking about finished either rough mixes or half-inch stereo flat masters of stuff.
Wow.
Yeah.
You're in the process of digitizing all the analog contents of the vault right now, and I can only imagine what a Herculean task this is.
Yeah.
How long have you been at it, and how much more time do you think it'll take until you finish?
We've been at it really full throttle since very late 2017, probably November or December of 2017. So we're almost 2 years into it, and it has many more years. I mean, and this is, at the pace that we're currently going, which is full time, many more years it will take to get through the stuff. I mean, we're doing it as best we can, chronologically, for a number of reasons. The first of which is that the oldest tapes, as you know, are the ones in potentially the most distress. So you want to get to those first.
Yeah, they become fragile as they age.
They become fragile as they age, exactly. So you want to get to those first, basically do it right the first time, and hopefully never touch those masters again. The challenge is that there are all kinds of commercial considerations that enter the frame on a daily basis almost. So even if we are moving at a good pace from a chronological standpoint, all of a sudden we'll have to pay attention to a different time period, and pivot to accommodate those things. So we get distracted from the task at hand. And particularly with the audio stuff, it is a real-time proposition. It's one guy, one tape. You got to make sure the heads are clean and the machine is calibrated and tape doesn't need to be baked, and Pro Tools is working properly, and the DACs are working properly, and you run down the tape in real time, and then you have to put the metadata in. I mean, it's a very, very involved process.
Time intensive. Very
time intensive. Yeah, it's not like you can put a baker's dozen tapes in a bank of machines and just hit play and go. I mean, it's really meticulous.
Attention to detail.
Attention to detail, exactly.
What was the first thing, after you kind of wrapped your head around what was in there and how much amazing material was in there, what was the first thing you ever picked out yourself to listen to?
Well, that's also a multi-part question, because I was involved in the when Warner released the sort of expanded Purple Rain remaster in 2017, I was kind of involved in an A&R, more than kind of involved in an A&R capacity for that. So I would say probably the things that were included on that were the first bona fide official vault tapes, that I had the chance to listen to right from the source. The first thing I worked on when I got in there that caught my eye and seemed like something that would be really worthy of release was Prince's version of Nothing Compares to You, which was released as a standalone single in 2018. But it was identified, obviously, before that, and I brought it to the attention of my colleagues, and so we sort of talked about how to best shine a light on that.
I can eat my dinner in fancy restaurants, but nothing, I said nothing can take away these blues, 'cause nothing compares, no, nothing compares to you, nothing.
Originally, Nothing Compares to You was written for and recorded by the Family in 1985. But, of course, when Sinead O'Connor recorded it and released it in 1990, it became a worldwide smash.
Yeah.
Was it just a song that she found herself, or did Prince think this might be good for this artist?
I don't know the answer to that. I don't know how it first came into Sinead's orbit, to tell you the truth. I mean, it could have been, somebody at her record label who was aware of the Family's, version or album, or who was a Prince fan in general and who kind of had a vision for what it could be. But I don't know how she initially became aware of it and then, ended up tracking it and, making it really her own. I mean, she really popularized the song in a way that perhaps even Prince didn't recognize could happen.
What was Prince's litmus test for deciding which of these songs would make a record versus sitting on the shelf?
That's an excellent question, and one that I contemplate on a regular basis, because listening to the stuff, especially when putting expanded bodies of work together that examine the entire creative era, for example, of a specific album or, period of Prince's creativity, the stuff that he was casting aside in many instances or decided to move on from or give to other artists is astonishingly high. I mean, from a batting average kind of standpoint, his average between probably 79 and at least 88, 89, 90, 91 was remarkable. I mean, just the sheer quality of the things that he gave away or otherwise abandoned or decided not to include is jaw-droppingly awesome for the most part. There's not, obviously not everything is otherworldly, but there's an astonishing array of world-class material in my estimation that was. Yeah. That was for whatever reason, and who knows, he was obviously a fickle guy. He was more creatively evolved, I think, than really anybody, certainly that I've ever worked with. A Hendrix-level good guitar player.
Oh, absolutely.
A better drummer than the vast majority of his own drummers, all of whom were, really good players. A guy who had facility on virtually any instrument he picked up. A singer of the high, just hearing his, on originals, for example, those vocals, for the most part, are just one-take guide vocals, which are orders of magnitude better than comped masters from most other artists that I can think of. Just sitting down in real time and banging something out that's, incredibly strong.
I've been wondering what to wear. I love a new rendezvous. I know you tell me you miss me. And I want to make love to you.
So I don't know what his reasons were on a lot of the stuff that he left behind or otherwise, just decided to move on from. But he had a very specific vision, with each thing, a very intentional sort of approach to these things. And I think that, when he recognized the song would be better suited for somebody else or for future release or otherwise just kind of, pushed to the periphery, those things were done with intention and, replaced with something that he felt was more representative of whatever the emotional impact that he was trying to convey was.
Right. You mentioned that, fantastic guitar player, amazing. He's just an amazing musician.
Yes.
He could play just about anything.
Yep.
Legend says.
Yeah.
And a lot of times he would go into the studio and he would record everything himself.
Yeah.
And some people think he was a perfectionist, but you've said that he wasn't a perfectionist. He was more concerned with emoting and making sure that the vibe he wanted to get across came across.
Yes. That's certainly one of the things, going into this, I kind of imagine Prince to be a perfectionist, and you hear a lot about his methods and how, incredibly facile he was in the studio. But a lot of the stuff really, I think, for the most part, almost without exception, was really about conveying some kind of feeling and what the listener would take away from it. And Prince putting everything he had into the performance. There's masters that have all kinds of, from a technical standpoint, all kinds of errors on them. Distortion, bum notes, just things that probably would get, snipped out of other masters by other artists just because of their, perceived lack of professionalism. But Prince kept them in there, and that became part of the, fabric of his creativity.
Yeah. Yeah. His recording style, obviously when he started recording, everybody was using 24-track, 2-inch tape, analog tape.
Yeah.
Did he stick with analog his whole career when he was recording in the studio, or did he move to Pro Tools or digital recording at some point?
He moved to digital, but pretty late. He was certainly inclined to use analog, I think, wherever possible, until it became, more difficult, I think, to do, to basically to walk in and just sit down and bang something out, because he was that kind of guy. If he had an idea at 2:30 in the morning, he could walk in and probably, more toward the end of his career, easily do that, from a digital standpoint than trying to put an analog tape, on a reel,
right,
or on a machine. But there was, pretty late into his artistic evolution, he was still, doing a lot of analog recording.
Was he a demos guy, or when he had an idea, he's like, I'm just going to go in and record it, and that's going to be my master? There
are demos that, for the most part, in my experience, are really generally pretty skeletal, and the sort of demos that you and I would think of as sort of typical demonstration recordings, in his case, are pretty much masters. The stuff on originals, for example,
right?
Even though they are categorized as demos, by a lot of the people who have listened to the stuff and have been determined as sort of the blueprints for whatever ended up emerging from the other artists, are largely finished tracks. They're not, it's not him sitting down with a Tascam, 4-track cassette recorder for the most part. It's going in and, doing a full-blown recording, sometimes in real time, sometimes in, with just a couple of overdubs, and being finished, from minute 1 to, 2.5 hours later, basically having the entire thing.
Right.
It was a sort of a dizzying speed that he worked at sometimes.
So when you went in and started to compile the songs for originals, what condition were the masters in? Did you have to do anything to bring them up to a high enough quality release?
Most of the masters were in exceptionally good condition. All of the 2-inch tapes, the multi-tracks, obviously were in great condition. The rough mixes, in many cases, existed only on cassette. So in that, in those cases, and if they were not suitable for commercial release or didn't have the kind of sonic integrity that Prince would demand, certainly, we went right back to the 2-inch and mixed exactly to the spec that's on the cassette. So basically, you're hearing, there's no real, sort of creative liberty being taken. It's, we're taking the existing rough mix and making it sound as if it were, being played for the first time, from a cassette or from a half-inch reel.
Approximating what was on the,
duplicating that exact mix. Exactly. We're not concerned with the vagaries of the 21st century pop marketplace. It has to be right.
You wanted the sound of the period.
The exact sound of the period.
Wow,
the
that's
exact
great.
Sound.
Did you then use older digital delays? Did you try to approximate the kind of gear that you knew he was using at the time?
Absolutely.
Fantastic.
We mostly sort of imagine ourselves in whatever, the period of time is July of 84, in
right.
the case of Nothing Compares to You, as if we're sitting in, whatever Sunset Sound Studio 3, and just working exactly in those conditions, not really with taking into consideration any of the, the sort of commercial concerns of, the 21st century marketplace.
Right.
We want to do this with, the overarching, I say this a lot, but the overarching sort of guiding principle with all of the stuff that we do is to do it with as much completeness and respect and integrity, as Prince would demand and as the body of work deserves.
So you must have try to adopt his mindset as you're working on it.
To the best of our abilities we can. And we involve people who were there at the time. The engineers who were in the room with him,
fantastic.
It's like that's part of the philosophy is to get people who were, in the room or in his orbit at the time and have a real perspective on it and know how the room sounded and know what was happening, on a minute by minute basis. So it's not, we're minimizing the guesswork as much as possible.
Yeah. Where did you guys do the remixes?
A lot of them were done by Nico Bolas at his studio in Ventura, actually, outside called the Surf Shack. And Tony Maserati did Nothing Compares to You back in 2018 at his studio, which I believe is called Mirrorball, which is in Burbank. But there were, existing half-inch tapes that we used. I think Love That Will Be Done was, a finished master. There was no mixing done with that. And I think Michael Koppelman mixed that in 91.
That will be done. I can no longer hide. I can no longer run. No longer can I resist your guiding light. That gives me the power to keep up the fight. Oh, love, that will be done.
So tell us about how the idea for Originals came about.
So when we released Nothing Compares to You as the standalone single, it was so well received and, generated so much interest that we thought it would be a nice idea or a nice extension of that idea to shine a light on some of the other material that Prince, wrote for or gave to other artists, that weren't envisioned as part of a Prince proper body of work. And there's a tremendous, a master list of like 268 of those things. So, we put the universe of possibilities together and kind of winnowed it down from there. And, that's how we came up with the Originals concept.
And the 268 songs that he wrote for the people that you just mentioned, were those primarily written in that hotbed of activity from...
That was over the course of his career. I would say, probably, I'm just ballparking it, but 60 to 70% were written, before the mid-90s. But there were certainly exceptions to that occurred afterwards.
Sure, yeah. Did he purposely write with other artists in mind, or did he finish the song and say, oh, this would be great for this artist?
I think he did, intentionally or deliberately write. In fact, I know he did, particularly in the early days when he was starting the process of engaging some of what became his protege kinds of acts.
Right, Vanity 6.
Yeah, there was there was a band that he had in mind called The Hookers, which was the precursor to Vanity 6. It was before Denise Vanity ended up, drifting into Prince's orbit. So this is, kind of summer of 81, controversy era. And my, knowing what I do about the style of the material and who was involved, I think he probably had, a vision of kind of a Gary Newman meets Go-Go's meets sort of Runaways collision of some kind, sonic and aesthetic kind of collision. That ended up, sort of morphing into Vanity 6 when Vanity entered the picture.
Make pink, blue, purple. I wanna make a good for you. Make
there was Hooker stuff that was, written specifically for the Hookers, turned into Vanity 6 stuff. Certainly things that he wrote for intentionally for the time or wrote, with Morris and, Jesse in mind.
Read a rumor. Jiggy loves get lonely too. All my lovers need stimulation. Honey, babe, I think that I need you.
Absolutely wrote deliberately for the family, for Apollonia 6, which was the successor to Vanity, when Denise left.
I need need you to get me on. I'm a bomb ready to explode. I need you to get me on. Be your slave, do anything I'm told. I'm a sex shooter, shooting love in your direction. I'm a sex shooter, come and play with my affection.
Most artists are just happy to write great songs for themselves. To have such a wealth of amazing songs
I
that
know.
you can't release them all yourself.
Yeah, I know. I mean, the stuff that he was giving away, it's just like, here's Jungle Love, here's Nothing Compares to You, here's Manic Monday. You're just like, okay. I mean, here's Sugar Walls. Here, it's like stuff that became substantial hits, and in some cases career-defining stuff for the other artists was just given away by Prince. Glamorous Life. And, just like, wow.
Did he ever co-write with anybody?
Yes, he did. He shared writing credits a lot of the time, and in some cases actually just gave writing credits to people that he, was working with or otherwise, contributed either completely or substantially to the material. I think that, a lot of the Sheila stuff, for example, he certainly co-wrote, but she is credited as the sole author on some of that
The
stuff.
anti-Elvis.
Yeah, exactly. So it's kind of it's sort of the, as you say, the opposite situation that most people have where you're making a kind of a land grab for a lot of stuff. It seems that he was maybe less concerned. I mean, and in some cases probably, I don't know what his exact thought process was, but maybe there was a thought that, if I am perceived as the guy sort of pulling the strings, these artists are not going to get the recognition they deserve because they'll seem, part of my...
Like nepotism or something.
Exactly. There's some kind of nepotism or their own inability to, to step up and have their own identity and, make a mark for themselves if the superstar is kind of, in the shadows behind them. So I think it was intentional.
Yeah. There are some songs on originals. Obviously, the Bangles re-recorded. Mm-hmm. They heard his version. They recorded their own version of it. Was he involved in the recording of their take on Manic Monday at all?
No. He was not. They retracked it. David Kahn produced it, and they retracked it, in a very specific way. I mean, it was similar to,
the bridge is a little different.
The bridge is a little different. There were obviously some sonic differences, but Prince was not involved at all in that session, from what I understand. I mean, it was done completely outside the scope of his involvement or presence.
Was Prince a big fan of the Bangles?
Yeah. He was. I mean, he had seen them a couple of times, I think, at least once in San Francisco. He was given a recording of their first album, I think, by Apollonia, if I remember correctly. Somebody mentioned he met Susanna Hoffs on a plane or something. I don't know if that's true, but however it happened, he basically submitted 2 songs to them. I mean, Manic Monday was initially intended for Apollonia 6. It was, tracked with her vocals and then left off the record.
Interesting.
Yeah. Then it was submitted with another song called Jealous Girl to the Bangles. They passed on Jealous Girl. They said, we'll do Manic Monday. And that's, how it happened. And then when they retracked it, I tell this story a lot too, but they retracked it and released it. And when it was released, it, became a number 2 single for them. It was kept off the number 1 spot only by Prince himself, who had released
oh my God, how funny is
the
that?
song Kiss. So he had the number 1 spot as a performer and the number 2 spot as a writer, which I think was only the 3rd or 4th time that had ever happened in Billboard chart history.
Yeah, the Beatles maybe.
The Beatles, exactly.
Yeah,
Beatles did it, I think. Maybe Stevie Wonder or somebody did. I can't remember, but there were very few instances where that had occurred.
Yeah. How funny.
Yeah.
Well, they picked the right song.
They picked the right song. That's exactly right.
Just another manic Monday. I wish it was Sunday. 'Cause that's my fun day. My I don't have to run day. It's just another manic Monday. Have to catch an early train. Got to be to work by 9.
Now, some of the songs on here, Prince recorded himself, and they were released by only changing the vocals on there. Can you give us a couple examples of songs on here that were recorded that way?
Well, there are certainly the Jungle Love master. I mean, it's certainly the same bed track as is Glamorous Life. I mean, those were things that received some overdubs and some mix changes and some tweaks, but they were what's largely what you are hearing, basically with Prince's vocal muted and Morris's or Sheila's or whoever's kind of inserted where Prince's would be. Makeup certainly is that way, which is a Vanity 6 track. Glamorous Life is the same master. Jungle Love is the same master, 2-inch. The majority of New Rendezvous, the majority of them are, the same.
In the case of Jungle Love, would other members of the time come in and add anything besides Morris singing, like the guitar solo at the end? Was that Jesse playing the guitar solo?
Yeah. And Jesse, in his, not defense, but to be fully transparent, I mean, Jesse was very involved in writing that track. I mean, my understanding is that, Jesse on a regular basis would submit stuff to Prince for consideration, and Prince would be encouraging, would say, this is not quite right, keep going. Finally, Jesse, I guess gave him a cassette demo of what the basis of Jungle Love was. Prince goes, that's the one we're going to do. So really the melodic idea, the bed of Jungle Love, I think is Jesse's, and Prince I think wrote the lyrics and the top line, and obviously, produced it and did, a number of other things on the track. But Morris is on there, Jesse's on there, Jill Jones, who was ubiquitous at those sessions, largely uncredited, doing background vocals, is on there. So there's, other people involved.
Yeah.
I've been watching you. Think I wanna know ya. Said now I'm a little dangerous. Girl, I love to show ya. My jungle love. I think I wanna know ya. Jungle love. Girl, I love to show.
Most of the songs on originals were cut by the artists or added their vocals fairly quickly after Prince had recorded and written his version, usually within a year.
Oh, yeah.
There are 3 songs on the album that do have a much wider length of time between Prince's version and the release of them. For instance, Kenny Rogers recorded You're My Love 4 years later.
Yeah.
In these cases, were these songs not written with these artists in mind necessarily, but found their way to them through other means?
In the case of You're My Love, I think that is what happened. I'm not sure that Prince wrote that with Kenny Rogers in mind. I don't know exactly how it got to Kenny, to be honest, and that's something that I need to research and get some clarity on. But however it happened, it drifted into Kenny's orbit, and he ended up retracking it in '86, which was 4 years after Prince did the recording. I mean, I sort of liken it to Prince doing kind of a Holiday Inn lounge kind of vibe. I mean, it's a very atypical kind of sonic proposition, particularly for that time period.
Oh baby, you're my love, and I love everything you do to me. Yeah. You're my love, and I love when you're around. You're my love, and I never let you down.
Let's talk about Glamorous Life.
Yes. So that was tracked in late December 27th, 83, I think. So it was kind of as Prince was, moving rapidly, into what became the Purple Rain era, but was done at a time when he was in LA. It was Sunset Sound. His normal engineer, who was Peggy McCreary at the time, I think was unavailable and was engineered by a guy called Terry Christian, who I guess was available for the session or whatever. But Prince had the song written and recorded in the space of from what I understand, like 24 hours or something, and then ended up giving it to Sheila, who did some overdubs and kind of made it her own, and that was her sort of unveiling as a solo artist, and became a substantial hit for her in '84. But it was, for all intents and purposes, finished in late '83.
Yeah, that one blew up on MTV too.
Sure
You
did.
couldn't get away from it.
It sure did. Yeah.
She's got big thoughts, big dreams, and a big brown Mercedes sedan. What I think this girl, she really wants to be in love with a man. She wants to lead glamorous life. She don't need a man's touch. She wants to lead the glamorous life without love. It ain't much.
Another song on the record is Hollyrock, another
Yeah.
Sheila E. song.
Yeah.
Tell us about that one.
So that was part of the soundtrack for a film called The Crush Groove, which was, kind of a hip-hop breakdancing film that was, I think, released in the summer of '85 or something. And Prince deliberately wrote that one, I think, for Sheila. I mean, you can hear him say, "I'm Sheila E," in the lyrics of the song, which is, kind of funny to hear him, sort of articulate that. But he inhabits it, so convincingly that it's, even though you hear it, you're like, well, what's Prince saying it? I guess, if anybody can get away with it, he can. But, I think he was demonstrating the way that, he envisioned the song to sound and to the, the kind of energy. And I mean, it's a total rave up. I mean, it's basically him playing virtually everything. I mean, Sheila is heavily involved in the, sort of percussive elements and background vocals. No question about it. I mean, she is no slouch. And I think, certainly Prince recognized that. I mean, he was, he tended to surround himself with people who could really cut it. And she was no exception to that. The whole spirit of the thing is just, it's very cool to hear Prince, sort of in a completely joyful, sort of reckless abandon, let loose in the studio kind of environment, sonic environment. It's a real banger, actually, and one that I didn't expect people to react as favorably to. I'm certainly happy they did. I put it on there just because, I thought it was a very interesting peek into his artistry, particularly at the time. But it was not something that I thought maybe people would, sort of gravitate to, without being guided there. But it seems to be one that, people are putting their hand up as, we love this.
Absolutely, they are. Yeah.
Sheila E's my name, Hollyrock's my game. Funky as I wanna be. Line up 100, swear to God, I rock 'em till they just can't see it. Mass appeal, a little girl smile, and make you happy, baby, all the while. 'Cause I'm bad, good God. And if you got a big enough stick, come on over, baby, to the Hollyrock. Don't you wanna learn a new trick? Lord.
When Prince signed with Warner Brothers, was there anything in the contract that afforded him the ability to unlimited studio time, complete control? How did he structure his deal?
His original agreement in '77, The three guys who were very instrumental in it were Mo Austin, who was the chairman of Warner and a beloved industry figure, Lenny Waronker, who A&R'd and signed him, really, and Russ Thyrett, all three of whom represented artistic freedom, I think, to Prince, and basically said, "Look, we will let you do whatever you want, just basically make us proud,"
Right.
which he did.
Yeah.
Lenny has told me several times that just witnessing Prince in Alpha Studio in Burbank when Prince did his showcase for Warner, he said, they basically for 40 seconds just watched him operate, and they're like, done. There was no question that this guy was, was absolutely born to do it. With Prince, there was no nepotism. He was not in LA or New York and around, a bunch of other musicians. He was, it was just sheer otherworldly talent, and force of will, and the belief of the people around him who sort of made it happen. It was inevitable, I think, that he would become who he was, or that the world would recognize who he was.
Yeah. But it wasn't easy for him, though. He definitely had some speed bumps along the way,
Absolutely.
even after he was signed and producing great music.
Absolutely.
For instance,
No question.
When he opened for the Rolling Stones at the Coliseum in '81, he was booed off the stage.
He certainly was. I think that was his first real taste of mass hostility. It really spooked him, from what I understand. And there were two shows. The first one where he kind of came out, in front of a very aggressive Stones audience who were not ready for, an African-American guy in
a leopard skin leotard.
Exactly. Playing, sort of a rock funk hybrid. They were just not having it. They were throwing lit cigarettes at bottles and stuff, from what I understand. But like all kinds of stuff. He flew home. He flew back to Minneapolis.
Wow.
Done. He wasn't even going to play the second show. Either Dez or Bobby, or maybe both, had to go, talk to him and physically bring him back to LA to do the second show. And Jagger had to call him, I think, and said, "Look, this happens to all artists at some point. We love you. The second show would be better. Please come out and do it." So he did, but that left an indelible impression. I don't think he ever contemplated supporting anybody else again after that. It was all headline tours. Nobody, there was nobody he would open for, and that's a major step in his artistic evolution. I think coincided maybe within a year of when he became a lot less open with the press, because there was a time, Des actually told me this story, there was a time, when Prince would sit down and be relatively open with interviewers. I mean, he was not the kind of guy who would, be inclined to have a chin wag with you and just,
Yes.
kind of shoot the shit, so to speak.
He didn't have time. He had to get back to work.
Right, exactly. He didn't have time. But he was also, a relatively insular guy, but he seemed more open to trying to be cooperative with interviewers for the most part, until there was some interview where Prince answered a question that I believe he, basically gave the caveat, look, this has to be off the record, I'll tell you, but I don't want this. And the interviewer printed or disseminated the information, and Prince basically said, I'm done. I'm not, I am, to Des, it's like, I'm not doing this anymore. I'm going to let the music speak for itself, basically.
It's a case of somebody ruining it for everybody else.
Yeah, exactly. So I think those two incidents, the Stones and the, interview, which were relatively close from a chronological standpoint, I think basically caused Prince to withdraw a bit more than, he otherwise would have.
But it must have played some role in defining how he created and disseminated his art after
Absolutely. Absolutely. No question about it. Yeah. I mean, there's a famous quote where he says, I am music, not I love music, not music is super cool. He's like, I am music. There's no distinction, basically. And that's how he will be, that's why he's immortal, because the music has so much impact and, has entered the cultural fabric in such a magnificent way.
Thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here with you.
Would you like to love me? Would you? Would you like to love me, baby? Would you? Would you like to be with me alone? Would you like to have me for your way?
Well, Rich, if I may say so, nothing compares to that conversation.
It was really cool to talk to Michael, and we appreciate his time. Thank you very much, to shed some light on something that doesn't get talked about a lot. All of that behind the scenes. Prince was very guarded. He was very serious about his art. He created so much great music, and we have so much more to look forward to from the Prince Vault and the Prince Estate in the coming years.
And as usual, the Rhino Podcast has the insight.
Thanks very much for tuning in. Don't forget to listen and subscribe on iTunes so you don't miss the next Rhino Podcast. Executive producer for Rhino Entertainment, John Hughes. Produced for Rhino Entertainment by Pop Cult and Rich Mahan Promotions. All rights reserved.